Good afternoon or early evening. It's nice to see so many of you here this afternoon. My name is Piper Campbell. I am the chair of the Department of Foreign Policy and Global Security at the School of International Service. I also am chair of American University's newly rebranded ASEAN and Indo-Pacific Studies Initiative. And it is in that capacity that I have the honor to open this event. The School of International Service, the ASEAN and Indo-Pacific Studies Initiative, and the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges and Governance are pleased to co-sponsor these remarks by AIIB President Jin Liqun. Now, more than ever, we think understanding the dynamics of regional institutions and differing approaches to economics and development is essential. And so we're pleased to bring to campus a perspective not so regularly heard in Washington. Speaking about perspectives not so regularly heard in Washington, I was mentioning to the president as we walked over that when the AIIB was first being created, the idea of the AIIB was being mooted. As some know, there was resistance on the US side. I was a US diplomat at the time, stationed in East Asia, and one of my more unfortunate or more challenging jobs was seeking to convince the country in which I was posted that the AIIB was a bad idea. I must admit, and I told the president this, that job became more difficult when his name was announced to lead the secretariat and then he was elected to lead the bank, because he has a sterling reputation. He had worked at a number of multilateral banks in advance. And so when his name was put forward as somebody who was going to lead the AIIB, that assuaged concerns in many corners about what the AIIB was going to be. And I think it will be interesting to have a conversation with him today to continue the conversation about what the AIIB is, what it does, how it works with all other multilateral development banks, and how it fits into the system. Jin Liqun is the inaugural president and chair of the board of directors of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Currently, he is serving in his second and last 5-year term in that position. Before being elected as the bank's first president, he actually led the secretariat that was tasked with creating the bank. So we can really say that he's been part of this effort from its inception. Jin has rich experience across the private and public sectors and with multilateral development banks, including the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. He also served as chair of China's first joint venture investment bank, chair of the supervisory board of the China Investment Corporation, and chair of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. Jin spent nearly 2 decades at the Chinese Ministry of Finance, reaching the rank of vice minister. For those of you who are wondering whether you selected the right master's degree, you might be interested to know that he holds a master's degree in English literature, perhaps recalling on Shakespeare to help him deal with tragedies in the real world. So he holds a master's degree in English literature from what was then called the Beijing Institute of Foreign Languages. And he was a Hubert Humphrey Fellow in the Economics Graduate Program at Boston University from 1987 to 1988. This session with President Jin will be moderated by AU's own Professor Amitav Acharya, the UNESCO Chair of Transnational Challenges and Governance and Chair of the ASEAN and Indo-Pacific Studies Initiative. So the sequence is that President Jin is going to make some remarks from the podium. There will then be a conversation, a fireside chat, lacking a fire, between Professor Acharya and President Jin, and then I will return to take questions from the audience. With that, President Jin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, friends, colleagues. Thank you, Professor Campbell and Ambassador Campbell. Thank you very much. And Professor Acharya. It's my great honor and privilege to come here and share my views and experience with you about the big issue, development. Development is something a lot of people talking about. But how to achieve development, it's not that easy. I would like to thank the School of International Service for hosting me this afternoon. And I know this is a renowned institution. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I drove past American University many times. And I thought this institution was, I think, particularly famous for the training of the future political leaders, diplomats, or all those people who can promote the mutual understanding among the countries and who can also work in international institutions. So I wish the young students here a great career path. And if you're interested, you are welcome to compete for jobs in our institution. And I would say it's very tough. Normally, when we have one vacancy, hundreds of applicants, even more than 1,000, they would compete for one position. But anyway, you still have a hope, given the excellent education in this institution. Since we have 1 hour, I will not speak too long here, but I would be quite willing to answer questions to you. Anyway, this bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is a multilateral development bank. Patent on the Bretton Woods institutions. Basically, in terms of the governance structure, the way it's managed and operated. But it's still very much different as a young institution created in the 21st century. We remain in the gene pool of multilateral development banks, but we are not a copy, not a clone of the existing institutions. We have some special features, but it's important for us to remain in the development gene pool because we are mandated to support development. And how this idea of creating a new bank came about. Some people say, well, there's World Bank, AIIB in Asia, and Inter-American Development Bank, African Development Bank, EBRD. What is the point to create another bank, or you call it the Regional Development Bank, in Asia and the Pacific? So I could understand that there will be some misgivings, some questions about the possible competition between this new bank and the World Bank Group. Just now, I was having a dialogue in the Center for Global Development. And one of the questions which was raised to me by a very good friend of mine, an American, many years ago, we worked together in creating the Sovereign Wealth Fund Forum. The question is, what is the difference between this bank, China-led bank, and American-led bank or Japanese-led bank? My answer is, please do not look at the shareholders, whether they are China, US, Japan, European countries, or some other kind of countries. Don't look at that. Look at the governance structure of an institution. Look at the management team. Look at the way it's operated. And also look at the culture. We judge any institution, any company not by what appears to be something, but look at the substance, look at the way it truly is, serving the interests of the broad, vast number of its members. So I make it point that regardless of the ownership structure, this bank is truly a multilateral development bank. But there's one major difference, which I would like to highlight. I hope I'm not preempting your questions. This is the bank called a regional bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But this bank has global outreach because we have members from all of the continents, except, I'm sorry to say, Antarctic. We have North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. And for the first time, you have this global reaching multilateral development bank has the developing countries as a majority shareholders. If you look at ADB, ADB is Asian Development Bank, created in 1960s. ADB has European countries as members and the United States. But the shareholding of the ADB has developed countries as the majority shareholder. Now, this bank has developing countries, the majority of shareholders, but how could we have the Europeans and North America, Canada, and others to join this? We have two countries, Australia and New Zealand. Culturally, you can call them European countries. Economically, they are, or geographically, they are Asian countries. So we still have basically all of the European countries and developed countries as shareholders of the institution. Why should they come? They are the minority shareholders, probably in such kind of institution for the first time. But if you look deeper into the institution, you look at the governance structure, look at the proper procedure, decision-making process, you have no difficulty to understand that in spite of the fact developing countries are the majority shareholders, developed countries has a voice no less strong than in any other multilateral development banks. In the top tier management, I am the only Chinese who is the president. We have 5 vice presidents. We have German, British, and the Russian, Indonesian, India. And then if you look at the other members of the top tier management, chief risk officer, a French national. We used to have a French vice president, okay. Chief auditing officer, Singaporean. Chief ethical officer, Thai. Chief financial officer, New Zealand. Treasurer, Italian. This is the top tier. So my response is look at the governance structure, top tier management, and also the way it's operated. The bank was operating January the 16th, 2016. Okay, it's now 9th year into operation. 17 months later, we got AAA rating by all of the 3 major rating companies. On what basis they would assign AAA rating for this institution? Of course, the bank is adequately capitalized. But if the management is not good, all this money would be gone, would be squandered. So, yes, adequate capital, and we don't have a track record as an institution. But individually, the top management team members have track record. So you can imagine reasonably well that when all these people with their excellent track record coming together, working together, you should expect this bank to be doing well. Just like to prepare a team for the World Cup, okay, you have your nationals coming back to your country. And how could we be sure that this team could be successful, could be beating others? You look at the individual players, and with a little bit time, they can cooperate, they can do a good job. So fundamentally, the bank is a multilateral development institution. And what's its function? The function is to promote broad-based economic and social development through investment in infrastructure and other productive sectors. That's the mandate. So you see clearly, we do not take poverty reduction as the overarching objective. We build infrastructure which paves the path for sustainable development. And when you promote infrastructure development, paving the path for sustainable development, poverty reduction will be resolved in the course of this process. Let me stop here, and I think it's better for you to raise questions to me, questions which may be lingering on your mind for quite some time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Jin. That was a nice overview to get us started. And I'm going to now probe you a little deeper into some of the points you made, and a couple of the points that I think we are very interested in hearing your thoughts on. Okay, yeah. So you started by saying what's the need for a new bank like AIIB, since we already have the World Bank and ADB, and you did give some explanation of the need. But could I just ask you, let's go a little step further. What do you do better or do at all that World Bank and ADB don't do, or used to do and don't do anymore? And I have in mind infrastructure, since that's in your name. And so the reason for the creation of the bank was to fill a gap, or am I just speculating? And also, how is your modus operandi differ from the standard World Bank and ADB? And particularly what I have in mind is conditionality. So could you please elaborate on that?
You see, the bank was conceptualized to be an institution which would be dealing with the urgent burning issues faced by many developing countries. Now, the World Bank and ADB, over the last 3 or 4 decades, started to focus very much on poverty reduction, and ADB took poverty reduction as the overarching objective, and some social sector projects, which in my view are very much important. The issue is we may not have we have been making a lot of progress in poverty reduction. Poverty reduction is still an issue. It might be a tall order. But then we would like to ask a question: why some Asian countries have developed very fast ever since the 1970s, 80s, all the way. And you know the Asian miracle, and emerging market economies in Asia seem to be doing very well. And a lot of people were lifted out of poverty in this whole process. So the answer is the countries, developing countries, must have the basic means to improve the livelihood of the people, develop their economy, empowering women financially. You know, what are the means to do that? You give them money to deal with poverty. It's a good idea, but development banks are not charities. They should give them the means to develop rather than simply give some money to eke out a living. So the answer is we must provide the basic means to the low-income countries, which is infrastructure. But infrastructure is defined in a very broad manner. It's not defined very narrow. Some people say infrastructure, roads, railways, power plants, power transmissions, airports, seaports. Fine, that's infrastructure. But we also believe that digital infrastructure, for instance, is getting more important. We regard the social sector as also infrastructure, productive sector. So it's very broad. You may have noticed that the recent publication is called Nature as Infrastructure. So I think this report is well received because we build infrastructure on this planet. But planet provides the basic infrastructure to us. Otherwise, you can do nothing, right? So we have this idea closely related to development, but probably not well thought out by the time we started to build this bank.
I was just
Oh,
going to ask about
conditionality. Conditionality. I think if you provide lending to somebody, could be an individual, an institution, or a sovereign government, you're not going to supposed to give them the money and leave it as that. You certainly would have some conditions, such as how the money is used, for what purpose, right? These are the basic questions. And to ensure that the money will not go to the wrong place. And nowadays, you look at the environmental, social problems, gender balance, all these kind of things. So conditionality is not a dirty word. The problems, developing countries, sometimes, if they have a choice, they would prefer not to borrow from MDBs because of conditionality. And actually, I would prefer to say excessive conditionality. Now, when you do a particular project, you want to achieve something. But the trend is you have to do everything for a single project. And then I think the burden is very high, as high as the Chinese kid, because the single Chinese child needs to be a pianist, a cellist, a violinist, and a lawyer, a doctor, and, because the two parents want the single child to do everything and completely ruin the child. Right? You cannot be masters of all trades. So excessive conditionality is the problem. But the basic conditionality is necessary. Now, let me give you something. For instance, if you build a road, of course, you have to make sure that environmental assessment is done properly. And you have to ask yourself whether this road going through some forests would be creating environmental problems. And then you would also, for instance, look at some other kind of issues, how this road is going to be coordinated with other transport networks, things like that. So conditionality, in my view, is important, but not excessive conditionality.
Thank you. I move to the next question, and that has to, let's come down to earth now. There are a lot of us who know about or heard about AIIB, but we have no clear idea, where are you working? You know, you have a global footprint, as you say, but could you give us some examples of the major projects that AIIB has funded since you have been around? And also invite your colleagues and staff there. I know Michael, my former student, is sitting there. They can join in as well. But like to hear, unless it is a secret, you can tell us, where are you building and what kind of things are you building?
The Articles Agreement does not specify that some members are part one countries, which means donors. Some other countries, part two countries, are beneficiaries. We don't do that. Any member is eligible to borrow from this bank. Okay, it's inclusive. And I think that is important for us to understand. In spite of the name of the bank, we have many developing countries who could borrow from us. Latin America countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, Central and Eastern European countries. But OECD countries normally say we're not going to borrow. They think development banks' money should be left for developing countries, which is all right. But we believe financing infrastructure projects in non-Asian countries is just as important. Asia cannot hope to sustain itself on its own. Asia's trade and investment relationship with Europe, with Africa, with Latin America has been increasing over the years. So we support the projects in other countries. In Latin America, I think Ecuador borrowed from us during the pandemic period. We deal with pandemic. And Argentina recently borrowed from us to develop a renewable energy project. But there's one project which I think is very interesting. It's a rural road. Rural road in the country, in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the country is Côte d'Ivoire. And why should we do that project? It's very interesting. Does this have anything to do with Asia? The answer is yes. We certainly would like to see that African countries, people would continue to have their life improved. Côte d'Ivoire is not doing badly over the recent years. I visited Côte d'Ivoire more than 30 years ago. But when we were proposed such a kind of project, a rural road leading to remote mountainous areas. But Côte d'Ivoire, they produce coffee berries, coconuts, cashew. Rural roads would be linked to the main roads and then linked to port. This project could provide economic opportunities to the people who live in deep mountains. And we help them ship their agricultural products to Asia through the railroads. This is an important missing link. And we connected it, okay? So it's not much money because it's not an expressway, very fancy expressway. It's just a rural road, but it's doing wonderful things. Particularly, I'm happy to see that this is going to create jobs for women and can empower women financially, and also would create a future for the children of those families in that mountainous areas. This is a typical case of connectivity and its benefits, which we can bring to the people who live in marginal places.
Thank you. So moving into quickly, last two questions very quickly. You mentioned in the beginning that there might be some perception of competition with existing MDBs. And particularly, while now that you're global, you could be also competing with IDB for African Development Bank. But I understand you are here to attend the spring. Or is it a coincidence that the spring meeting of the fund and the bank, were you invited, or you came, they take you as one of their peers? Or how do we cooperate with them? Have there been any joint projects, parallel projects that they fund, you fund, or jointly fund, or are you all alone?
You see, the developing countries have a huge demand for financial resources and technical expertise, managerial expertise to be provided by the MDBs. And the people are very much worried about the competition. Indeed, there's too many things for us to do. And we only have complementarity role to play. So from day one, we had a very good relationship with the World Bank and AIIB. We have co-financed a number of projects with them because, as I said, development is a huge challenge. There are far more things for us to do than probably for us to be locked in a competition, racing to the bottom. We offer you better kind of conditions and reduced conditionalities, as so-called, or give you lower interest rates, something of that kind. That never happened. And we have heads of MDBs meetings. This time we are going to have the heads of MDBs meetings Saturday. All of the heads of the MDBs really lay their heads together to discuss development issues. I could give you some of the examples. For instance, we work with the World Bank on some of the major infrastructure projects. The World Bank need to have general capital increase, maybe every 7 years or 6 years, 10 years, not more than 10 years. But when they are running out of capital, certainly there will be intense negotiation with the shareholders about a capital increase. But it's not that easy, as you see, to reach agreement that there will be general capital increase. And how could we handle that? The World Bank, we work with the World Bank, and we tell them. And I told the World Bank presidents, Jim Kim, David Malpass, now Ajay Banga, I said, you can continue to lend to that country by reducing the amount because you are reaching the limit, right? You reduce your financial contribution, which you pay. And you can maintain the presence and the influence in the countries. And by working together, MDBs, sometimes we, World Bank, AIIB, work together. You can actually really positively influence the macroeconomic decisions of that country to help them to improve the way they manage the economy. It's not easy to do such a kind of project single-handedly. Now, for instance, we are working, we cooperated on a TANAP gas pipeline project, and with commercial banks financing, World Bank, AIIB, and us. And also, for instance, we are working on a hydropower project in Tajikistan called the Rogan hydropower plant, power station. The World Bank worked on the feasibility and environmental studies for 80 years. For 80 years, they did a thorough work, but they did not decide to finance this project. So when I came to Tajikistan a couple of years ago, I was helped to understand the importance of this hydropower project. And then we thought it was a good idea. We should work together. We talked to the World Bank, and finally the World Bank wanted to do it together with us. So this is one of the few examples. I believe that by working together, we ADB can have a greater impact. I told the World Bank president, regardless of the amount you put into any project for any country, you take the lead. And say, you will be the conductor. Just give me a seat. I can play clarinet, oboe, I can play violin, anything, or French horn. Just give me a seat. I don't care whether I'm the first violinist or something like that. I just care about what I can do to make a symphony.
Thank you. And my last quick question. We at the American University, and we're in Washington. And Ambassador Campbell just mentioned that the United States officially was not very keen on the AIIB. And now after all these, we know that it's almost a decade since AIIB was formed. Do you want the Americans to be in officially in AIIB as members? What the United States can bring into AIIB that you don't have? And what are the pros and cons? Or you are pretty happy without the United States?
You know, we really invited US, Japan, and others to join this bank. But most of the developed countries decided to join as founding members. Canada joined, I think, 8 months later. But US and Japan decided not to join. So I told them I understand. This is your sovereign government's decision. I can understand why some countries want to join, some others choose not to join. It is irrelevant to our cooperation. So we work together, and the bank's policy is we are inclusive. We have an American nationals working in our institution, taking very important positions in the treasury, in its controls, in policy. They work in our institution, Japanese also, doing a very good job. And also we do not exclude American companies when it comes to international competitive bidding. The American companies can win the bid, okay? And as long as they are competitive. So I think the answer is, regardless of the membership, we can work together. And we have maintained a very close working relationship with American financial institutions. And we also hope American real sector businesses can also be participating in our financing. So now I think the US government officials, think tanks, and they all understand the way we operate. We don't have any problems. Right?
Thank you. So that brings to the conclusion this part of the event today. So I will hand over to my colleague, Piper Campbell, for the general Q&A. Two microphones. Yeah.
We actually have mics in the two rows, and I will ask you to go to a mic so that, because we're also recording, and that allows for the recording to be heard. And I see we already have our first. And so if you do know that you want to ask a question, please go ahead and line up. I'm going to suggest that we're going to take questions in twos. And that way we'll sort of see if we generate some themes among the questions. My friend and colleague from Mongolia.
All right. Hello to you, President Jin, and thank you so much for your time. My name is Telman. I am a graduate student from Mongolia at School of International Service with American University. And my question to you today is, could you elaborate on AIIB and in developing country and debt sustainability? And you used analogy as lending somebody, but how are you making sure they're paying back or they will able to pay back later? Thank you.
Good question.
Hi, I'm also an international student here. I'm from actually Shanghai, China. And thank you very much for talking about the AIIB here, and I learned a lot. So I have a similar question actually, actually two questions. So I know like how infrastructure is very much focused with AIIB, but like I definitely appreciate it, and I see the benefit of infrastructure as far as like my experience back in China. But also I do hear, as far as I know, like infrastructure has rather lower return rate compared to a lot of other investments. So I was wondering how AIIB kind of balances the benefit, the profit with this like projects, and how to keep it kind of sustainable. And the other question is compared to the direct foreign aid we see a lot of times in bilateral relations between countries, how is AIIB as an international organization and capital works kind of better, or the benefits compared to the direct foreign aids? Thanks.
I respond. You know, debt problem have been harassing quite a number of countries over decades. The dilemma faced by highly indebted countries, whether they would continue to borrow or just to pay back all the debt without borrowing, without building up the new debt. It's a very difficult question. But my idea is that, first of all, if you look at the debt problems will build up under bad management. So the country could be suffering, but if you stop providing new money to that country, the situation would be getting worse. So the solution is not to stop lending to them, but to provide fresh money and apply the money in a way which could help their economy to develop. So that is, I think, a very important issue which should be discussed by the government, and also the government concerned are also the international institutions. Give you a recent example. Sri Lanka certainly is highly indebted. And because of the COVID-19 and because of the geopolitical issues, their source of income from foreign tourism dropped significantly. And for a moment, they did not have foreign exchange in their coffer. So should we lend to Sri Lanka or not? If we stop, just like stop giving them the fresh blood, the country is dead. So while the Sri Lanka is negotiating with IMF, we started to talk to the government, the former government officials. And I only want to have the guarantee you must be serious in reaching agreement with IMF on a macroeconomic program. Now Sri Lanka is doing better, and the tourists coming back, their foreign exchange revenue is increasing substantially. I think it's a typical case. Now, if the country is now serious and careful about using their money, they can avoid debt problems. But over the years, they need to continue to grow and absorb the old debt. It's painful, but it's possible. It's possible to deal with. Now, with regard to infrastructure, return about infrastructure. Infrastructure's return may not be as high as some very lucrative businesses, but infrastructure is the key. Without infrastructure, you can do nothing. You could not have highly profitable businesses developing. Indeed, infrastructure and improved logistics help quite a number of economic activities to do very, very well, or much better than otherwise is the case. So that is why the infrastructure development sometimes could be, or in most cases so far, could be the responsibility of the government, federal government or local government, because they know when you pave the path, the people will be coming. but not necessarily. I think it depends on how these kind of projects would support the investors in a way which would make them feel free of the troubles. For instance, when you finish a road and you have cash flow, these kind of lower return but a steady cash flow are ideal targets for the insurance companies. For those kind of investors who do not expect very high returns, but they want to have assured, steady cash flows. So this is actually very important. But if you ask them to invest in the green field to do such a project, they won't do it. But once the project is done, they want to put money in it because they can be assured of this. Now, let me tell you, earlier in the 80s, when China started to build a highway, expressway, where does the money come from? We borrow from the World Bank. And in Zhejiang province, very vibrant private activities. They borrow money from the World Bank, and with the Chinese efficiency, 2 years' time, the road is done. And then immediately, they sold the road. They sold it. And they checked with the World Bank, can we sell it? World Bank said, yes, of course, as long as you give the money back to us right away. They said, okay. And so they sold the road, make the money, send it back to the World Bank, and with money to start to build new roads. When a new road is built, sell it. So that's the part of the capital formation, you may say, right? And the return is not very high, but steady. It's not that bad. But more importantly, the economic activities in that province, were booming.
Over here.
Hi, President Jin. Thank you so much for your speech. It's really insightful. My name is Yitong, and I work for the World Bank. Actually, we just met this afternoon at CGD.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I've been looking at the comparison, the differences between how World Bank works and how AIIB works. And I realized it seems to me that AIIB doesn't have a lot of policy interventions in loan projects. And I'm just wondering why, and is that true, and why? And do you see that hiring more policy specialists in each sector will help AIIB loan project more efficient? Thank you so much.
I did not answer the question, direct foreign aid. I think certainly it's very much different. Generally speaking, bilateral direct aid has very specific targets. And the multilateral development banks work in a very much different way. So I do not want to disparage direct foreign aid, which in many cases are very helpful. But it is not that easy for the direct foreign aid to be free from any political considerations, which might be more important for the donor than for the recipient countries. Okay, you cannot generalize, but overall, MDBs with the resources coming from all of the shareholders, and they will look at the broad development impact. With regard to policy intervention, some of the borrowing members react pretty strongly to the policy intervention for various reasons. Sometimes the policy intervention might be just a way ahead of the country's actual situations. The policy intervention or the policy advice is good, but the country may not be able to do that at this moment. Just like elementary school student, you give them college textbooks, you work on it, and because it's good, but they cannot make neither head nor tail of this. It's not possible. I remember in my country, because I was in charge of the World Bank operations, and they came to us discussing the policies. We did not even have marginal cost concept. We had only average cost. And people talk about marginal cost. What do you mean by that? We don't know that. And then they wanted us to raise the prices of coal, for instance, coal and electricity, water. And the government said, no, you cannot do it. Truly, it is very difficult for the people to be used to that kind of thing. So it's a timing. If the policy intervention is good, the issue is how you apply the policy. Give you one example. For instance, when the World Bank came to us, that you need to raise the water tariff. It's too cheap. Yes. So there is an issue of affordability. And I never believed you paid for water's affordability. They would complain if you pay for 1 cubic meter of water, tap water at home, you increase the prices. They will protest. Over the weekend, the young couple would bring their child. They have no qualms buying this water, even though one bottle's price could be buying 1 cubic meter of water. Why? Because yes, I buy this bottle for my kid because I'm willing to pay for it. Water from tap, it's government's responsibility. No, that's the mentality problems, right? We still have this problem even in developed countries, right? That is why policy intervention, in my view, if it's good policy advice, is important. Should we do it? We don't want to lecture the governments, or we don't want to impose the policy on them if we do not think they are ready. But we could have policy dialogues with them, and in a way which would convince them of the need to do something about their macroeconomic policy. For instance, we now have a new policy lending instrument. It's called policy and budget support lending. And the people say, what's the difference between your policy and budget support lending with the, for instance, traditional institutions policy lending? We aim at improving the macroeconomic and regulatory environment for climate change financing. Very much focused. It's earmarked for improving the regulatory environment of the country so that the private sector investors would be willing to go and invest in the country. Thank you.
So I'm afraid we only have 8 minutes left, and I was about to say that I thought we had probably just enough time to take these 2 questions. Let's see, Harith, we'll take your question and the other, and we'll see if you can give us very precise questions. We may be able to squeeze in all 3, but we're going to start with these 2 over here.
Okay, let me try. My name is Harith. I'm from Malaysia. I'm also a grad student here at SIS. So I have 2 questions. The first one, you provide a really great and extensive context in your speech and also the fireside chats. You talk about your global outreach. You talk about basic conditionality, not excessive conditionality as compared to IMF, which by nature, is attractive for developing countries to get it lending from AIIB. And you also talk about metaphorical situation where World Bank is a conductor and you're the orchestra. By what year do you think, where do you really draw the line of not, being a duplicate to any other MDBs while you're creating all these differences with successful Sri Lanka case studies? Would you be able to create your own orchestra for the next 10 years or 20 years perhaps and replacing these other MDBs while the first to go-to place for other developing countries to get, lending or, money? Second one is rather controversial. I'm not sure if you want to answer this, but last year has been a very controversial year for AIIB with, Canada suspending its ties with AIIB due to a claim or alleged claim that there is a CCP control or intervention in AIIB. And AIIB has conducted a thorough internal investigation and found these claim is unfounded or baseless. So would you be kind enough to unpack that for us so that we'll get a clear view of what's going on? Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
And let's take the next question.
Thank you, President Jin, for your insights. My name is Hong Jia. I'm a research assistant from Asia Society Policy Institute. And I have a question on your thoughts on the emerging technologies impact towards international development banks. May I ask about your thoughts on how would you think about artificial intelligence impact towards AIIB's future work? And will you believe that if there's any connections between future cybersecurity threats towards the work on AIIB and its financing projects? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Those are a fair number of complex concepts there. So we'll go ahead. We'll take your question and we'll see.
Concise. Charles DeLeva, former World Bank, and I'm an adjunct professor here at the law school and SIS. And thank you so much for being here, President Jin. You spoke about climate conditionality as well. The Just Energy Transition Partnership that was launched by Secretary Kerry with much support from, I think, China and developing countries seems to be fizzling out because there's not enough concessionality in the views of Indonesia, Vietnam. What will it take to overcome this problem in financing global public goods? And is the talk about relying on capital markets just not going to succeed because we can't get enough incentive on the private side? Thank you.
Thank you. Last batch of questions. Thank you very much. You see, MDBs now work as a system because we understand we share the common objective of developing sustainable economies, reducing poverty, dealing with climate change. So we have the shared objective, but we sometimes a little bit division of responsibility and division of labor. So we work together and try to, for instance, work out a system. We finance a project, co-financing, and we adopt the environmental social standards of other institutions. This can save a lot of trouble for those institutions and also for the client members. Well, if the World Bank is leading, we adopt the World Bank's standards. So you see a lot of cooperation is producing very good results. And I think consensus is that by working together, we can achieve better results. Sometimes there could be something, the perception problems, the optics, and we have to deal with them in a way which could be constructive. For instance, you know about the case, a Canadian Director General complained about the banks being controlled by CCP, and he circulated his message in social media after he left. But I'm not going to talk about his personal family problems, which led him to behave in a way which is really hard to understand. I just want to alert you to the fact that immediately after that, we announced the AIIB's management will launch an investigation into this case. And also with an external advisor who used to be the director on the board, who's an Australian. And you know, Australia and China were not on very good terms So in 2 weeks' time, we completed the investigation, and no evidence whatsoever could be discovered to suggest that these banks controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, because we operate by our rules. And the management team, as you saw, I'm only the Chinese. Then Canadian government decided to suspend all its activities with this bank and launch the investigation. And it said it would public the conclusions of the investigation in 2 weeks' time. Now, more than 6 months, Canadian government still keep this on hold without announcing or disclose its investigation into the case. And it's not appropriate for me to comment on the Canadian government's decision. But obviously, if they have discovered the wrongdoings of this bank, you would have known about this much, much earlier on, right? And for the concessionality of the lending, you see the World Bank has either, AIIB has ADF. The concessional lending has been doing a wonderful job all those years, but the resources are very much limited. And we have limited concessional funding, which we would use for interest buy down, rather than to use these resources for direct poverty reduction intervention. Because we believe, as I said, an infrastructure project would be good for the economy on a sustainable way. But in infrastructure financed by non-concessional funding could be very costly. So with interest buy down, we can do a project which otherwise cannot be done. And we are also working with some of the members who would donate the money for a soft fund window. And also we are working with philanthropists. We are working with them to reduce the costs of infrastructure for some of the low-income countries. So there are some creative ways to do this. But the major difference is we do not do directly financing poverty reduction. We finance the project which could be good for stimulating the economy, paving the path for sustainable development over the long term. So it's a matter of how you use these resources. Anyway, it's new, but we have learned from the experience of many our sister institutions. We are not smarter. We just learn from their experience. Thank you very much for your time.
There was one.
Oh,
question about
yes, AI. We have to support the projects which can close the digital gap between developed countries, developing countries. We may not support some of the AI or IT project, which is still in the early stage. The bank would only invest in technology with maturity, with mature technology, because this is the public's money, it's not venture capital. So we won't do that. But with AI technology is further developing, getting more mature, and we may do something about this kind of thing in the private sector operations, not the sovereign. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking President Jin. Thank you, Amitav.
We will have a lot of events again. And thank you, President Jin, for coming. And it's kind of a soft launch of ASEAN and Indo-Pacific. You're very honored.